And so I broke every single rule book. I broke every single one, and I am not sorry I did it, and I would do it again tomorrow. And I would encourage anybody else that's running, if it didn't work for you, break it and do your own thing.
Wow. Well, and that's just it, right? Break the old playbook, do what is authentic to you. I think that's the best advice. Hi, I'm Heidi Beidinger.
And I'm Stephanie Wilson.
And welcome to What the Gerrymander, brought to you by Hoosier Victory Alliance, also known as HVA. I'm a former candidate for State House and current member of the St. Joseph County Board of Health.
And I'm a co-founder of Hoosier Victory Alliance. You're listening to What the Gerrymander, our podcast about reclaiming and rebuilding our collective political power in MAGA-captured states. Our podcast is for Indiana residents and people living in other MAGA-captured states, because MAGA is implementing the same strategy of voter suppression, gerrymandering, and cruel culture war legislation across the country. If you live in a blue state, please consider adopting Indiana or another MAGA-captured state to help contest every seat and roll back the autocracy happening in front of our eyes. Jessica Piper is a mother to 5 and grandmother to 3 and lives on a small farm in the Missouri-Iowa border. She was born and raised in rural America. She earned degrees in English and teaching from the University of Arkansas and was a high school American literature teacher for 16 years. After the 2016 election of Trump, Jess became politically active. She ran for office in 2022 for state representative in HD1 in Northwest Missouri. She was not successful, but used the experience to organize progressives in rural Missouri. Jess is the executive director for Blue Missouri and hosts a weekly podcast called Dirt Road Democrat, which can be found wherever you listen to podcasts. Our conversation with Jess was loads of fun. She and Heidi had so much in common. She's truly an inspiration. She describes herself as a nobody from nowhere, and yet she's amassed a large national following and speaks truth to power on a daily basis. She's speaking out for every one of our kids when she talks about properly funding public education and giving our children the skills and knowledge they'll need in today's world. Hello, Jessica.
Hi, Steph. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm so glad that you could be with us. And I have Heidi here. I'm Stephanie, and Heidi Beidinger is here as well.
Hi,
Welcome,
Heidi.
Jess. We're so looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys so much.
We have been discussing the overall war that MAGA is waging against Americans. And one of the key battlegrounds is education. So MAGA is defunding public education. Teachers are not getting paid properly. They're banning books. They're outing LGBTQ kids. They're not letting trans kids have any sort of support in the schools or the medical community. And you've been such an outspoken advocate of public education. What do you make of their attack on education and children? What does it mean in the larger context? What does it mean for kids? One of the things that we were talking about is we have to help people understand that it's their kid in the classroom that's really bearing the brunt.
Exactly. And, we have to realize that this isn't a new thing, that this started a long time ago with Milton Friedman and giving vouchers to white parents to attend segregation academies because they're upset about Brown v. Board. And so we can go back to the 50s and say, okay, that's the origin of vouchers. And so I want everyone to understand that's where vouchers came from. And then we go to the 1970s. We have the moral majority. We have Jerry Falwell wanting President Reagan to win the presidency. And so he called all his evangelicals. And I should say, I speak about evangelicals all the time because I was one. I grew up as a fundamentalist, a Southern Baptist. And so I understand the church and what goes on there. But in 1979, Jerry Falwell decided, gosh, how can we get Reagan appointed to the presidency and beat this guy named Jimmy Carter, who was an actual, Sunday school teacher. And they landed on two things: abortion and school vouchers, school choice. And so a lot of people, it seems like it's so strange that all these things come together to form this one, push toward privatization and that sort of thing. So these are not new things. Betsy DeVos was appointed by Trump to dismantle public education. She said it out loud. She meant it. She did it in Michigan. And so it's just a continuation of that. And so now you have red states like Missouri. Missouri is 49th in educational funding, 50th in starting teacher pay. We had some kind of not great scores come out just a couple days ago. And I mean, the Republicans grabbed them and they ran. And they were like, look, see, we told you. And I want everyone to listen to this. They have been in charge for 2 decades, 20 years. So if a Republican holds up a bad score on a school, I'm going to say, who did that? Who's in charge of that? What did y'all do to prevent that? They didn't. This is purposeful.
That sounds, Stephanie, that sounds just like Indiana. I mean, you were describing Indiana to a T.
You guys know why. This is everybody I talk to. They're like, oh my gosh, that's Kansas. That's Iowa. That's Texas. And we know why, because we have lobbying groups like ALEC and Project Blitz who create legislation and then they send it to state lawmakers across the state. And I'll tell you, you know it because 1, we have matching legislation in all these red states. But 2, if you have the chance to ask a Republican lawmaker about his bill, you ought to do it. You know why? He won't have
no
any
idea
how to explain it because he didn't write it.
Exactly. One of the things I'm thinking is you're like going through the history, and I'm a historian, so that always makes me excited when we can trace things back. Is actually the Missouri Compromise, right? Mm-hmm. So the Missouri Compromise comes into the Union with Maine so that Missouri could be a slave state. And aside from Indiana, a lot of the states that are going through similar things. Which side of the Civil War were they on?
Exactly.
The pattern,
There is a pattern. It's something that, we seem to be continuing. And I would say that you being a historian would probably know that there's a reason that the GOP doesn't want kids to learn accurate history because they wouldn't understand any of that, right?
Right.
Right. Well, they want an uneducated, non-critically thinking, passive citizenry so that they can keep grabbing power.
Yeah, I think that's an accurate statement, Stephanie, for sure. I mean, so talking about history, I mean, isn't that what was happening in Cambodia after the Vietnam War? Precisely that, right? All the intellectuals were gone. The educators were gone because they were in the field. We're going to make everybody exactly the same as what they were sold, right? So that we don't have people who can think for themselves anymore so that they can garner the power and the wealth. And that's the same thing that's happening now.
Yeah, it is a consolidation of power for the consolidation of wealth. But when they go after CRT, which first of all, we know isn't taught K through 12, they can't define it. But when they talk about it, I think what really hits people is they're talking about critical history. Now, we latch on the critical part because, we understand what they're talking about, where other folks might latch on to the racial part, right? Critical thinking is what they're trying to get rid of in schools. And they've already taught the MAGA crowd to do that. They've already taught them to say, I only want the 3 R's, taught in school. And you swing around your head and you're like, do you want your child to just have a 3rd grade education? Because that's about where that would get you, right? After that, you're going to have critical thinking. You're going to be reading literature and history and understanding science. And the people who are writing these bills, their kids aren't going to school that don't have, critical thinking. Nope. Their kids are going to schools where they're sitting in Socratic circles and they're talking and they're visiting and they're figuring out the world. So it's not their kids. I hope everyone listening understands that these bills aren't meant for their kids. They're meant for ours because they want, I think in general, for our children to work for theirs.
There was a lot to unpack in just what you said. The 3 R's that you're talking about in critical thinking and so forth. Can you unpack that just a little bit more?
So it goes back to, the reading, writing, and arithmetic is what for decades in the early 19th century, 18th century, that's what people were talking about. That's all you went to school for. If you were poor and you couldn't pay for school, you got a very basic education. You got a very basic education because you couldn't pay for it. Now, we're under this concept that K through 12 has always been a thing and it's always going to be a thing. And folks, they don't want that. The libertarian utopia system for the world is if you can't pay for it, you don't get it. And that includes roads and healthcare and education and whatever else, they deem. So they have taught folks to say, no, I only want this basic education for my children. And it's near criminal to bait people with that and then indoctrinate them in this theory that you shouldn't expect much from education for your kids. they should be at work. And if you guys want to talk about it, we could talk about that rolling back of the labor laws.
Right. It's directly connected. One of the things that we're doing, Hoosier Victory Alliance, is we are doing a deep qualitative study of moms in Indiana right now, but also across the country. And this is a little bit of me speaking out of school, as it were. The things that we're finding is that parents, mothers, want universally to have their kids get a good education, whatever that means to them, that their teacher be empowered to teach in their classroom. And all the rest of it is noise, but they don't put together necessarily what I want for my kid in my classroom with the public policy that makes it so or not so.
Right.
But that seems to be a near universal thing that we're finding. We're not talking to the MAGAs, but everybody else wants my kid to be in my classroom with a good teacher, getting the attention and services that they need. And
when you talk to parents in general, when I was knocking doors in my community and I would talk about schools, and they would say, A, B, and C is happening in schools. And I would say, in your school? Oh, no, not my school. Somebody else's school.
That's right.
They're happy with their teachers in general. We're happy with our local public schools. We would like them to be funded. But when you see parents railing against a certain thing, it's usually not their school.
Jess, I can totally back that up as well. That was my experience. I spent 10 years in the high schools, 9 through 12. And it was exactly that. The mayors want to throw public education under the bus. And then, people get on that bandwagon. Yeah, they don't do this and they don't do that. But then when you're talking to somebody, they're like, isn't our school amazing? Isn't principal so-and-so? He's brought in more monies. And what about that band? And what about the music? Whatever it is, right? And they love that. And suddenly this urban myth that we're all supposed to hate schools, public schools, just floats away. All you do is got to go to some performance or a parent-teacher conference, and you can watch the faces on the parents about how happy they are, generally speaking, right? The vast majority of them are very happy with it. So that's how I connect what Stephanie is learning through that research to my experiences. It totally goes together. And I appreciate that because I've been out of education for a little while. So I'm glad that we're doing that work with HVA.
So one of the components of this, in addition to making a dumber citizenry and a less critical, we think about critical as in critical thinking, they think about critical as in criticizing. So is that they're targeting LGBTQ kids and trans kids as their first targets. And we now know that Gen Z is identifying as LGBTQ at like a 20% rate, way higher than our generation. Our generation is at 3%, right? So how do you think about this, and what is your response to the way that they're targeting certain kids over others?
So in Missouri this week, the House banned all gender affirming care for kids in the state. They also banned, kiddos playing sports. I think we had 10 bills submitted this year to go against trans kids, and we only have 4 trans kids playing in the entire state of Missouri. They've written more bills than there are children targets of the bills. I have some millennial kids, and because I had kids for a long time, I have some millennials, and then my youngest is Gen A. And the funniest thing about her is we were watching a documentary, and it was talking about the history and the legality of gay marriage in America. And they said something about it being illegal to marry if you were gay. And she turned around to me and she said, "What?" Like it was a foreign, never in a million years would she have thought it would have been illegal to marry someone you love. So these kids are growing up not understanding the hatred and the vitriol. I'll say that I went and spoke to Boone County Democrats on Tuesday night, and Senator Greg Razor was there, and he's a Missouri state senator. He's openly gay. He said, over the last 2 decades, it's kind of gotten not cool to attack gay people because they're just in society. People see them more, people know them, they love them. And they're like, it's not cool to attack them anymore. So he said they've had to change gears. They did some polling. There were people who put out surveys in the state and across the country, and they found out it's okay to attack trans kids, and it polls well. And he said, honest to God, when he talks to folks in the state house that are writing and creating these terrible bills, they're like, polls well.
It's like we always need a boogeyman, don't we?
Yes.
Always need somebody that we can beat up. Going back to the comment you made that they actually have more bills than there are kids who it affects. What do you make of that energy? You know, we could be working on improving things that affect 75% of Missourians or 75% of Hoosiers here in the state of Indiana. And instead, we're focused on a fraction of 1% of what's going on. Why is that okay? How do we correct that imbalance? Why is our energy not being used in a better way?
Because they don't have good policies, because they have been in charge for 20 years and they have destroyed my state. I can go outside and pick up a piece of highway and bring it into the house if I wanted to. They can't shovel the snow off the road because it's fallen apart. We don't have shoulders. I live in farm country. I can't get around a combine for 10 miles because we don't have shoulders. It's dangerous. Our schools are defunded. Our hospitals are closing, 14 in the last 2 decades. Okay. Everything around us is disintegrating. And who's in charge? The Republicans. So they can't say, why don't we focus on roads? Obviously, that would be a fantastic thing. They've always got to go, and you said it yourself, find a boogeyman, find something that will energize a base and go after them, because they've got to distract us. If they don't distract us, we know what's going on.
There was just this statement that everything is disintegrating and they've been in charge for 20 years. I mean, that's identical to Indiana. And as you already alluded, it's Texas, it's all over the place. Everything is disintegrating. I have to keep repeating that. It's totally true. I'm just like, it's amazing how similar this all is. It's amazing how similar.
Well, I think they break things so that they can say that they're broken, so that they can get more power, so that they can break things some more.
Stephanie, you have hit on the DeVos plan. That is the entire, MO. That's what they do. And it's the only way you can do it, because it's insane. It's extremist to say that we should not educate every kid. That's an extreme agenda. To say that we should close public schools, that's extreme. But they've gotten us to sort of think, well, maybe everybody doesn't need to go all the way through 12th grade, right? Maybe kids could go to work instead. I mean, what's the point of reading Of Mice and Men when they could be getting experience at Chick-fil-A, right? That is what they have gotten us to say is sort of normal. Public education is the last good and holy thing that we have not privatized in this country, and they are fighting tooth and nail to get it away from us, and we know why. It's a lot of money. It's the biggest item in most state budgets is, educating kids. Also, it's anti-union. They can break teacher unions. These teachers actually wanting, good working conditions. They want pens in their classroom, scissors, and they want to be able to, pay for their rent and their food. In my part of the world, we're 50th in starting education. There are folks that start out with a bachelor's degree making $30,000 a year. Their bring home pay after retirement could be $1,400, $1,500 a month, certified teachers in my state. And they wonder, and my daughter goes to a school with 16 other fifth graders. That's the whole class. And teachers it's a revolving door. And you wonder why, right?
Yeah.
This is why. And this eventually, if you've got, and this is no shade at new educators, because I was one at one time too, but you need mentors and you need a mix, right? You need folks who have been there for a little bit. But if you've got buildings full of 23 and 24-year-old kids, it's tough. It's tough. And if you have a kid who has a new teacher every single year, you see how that might be problematic eventually, right?
Yeah.
If you have a kid that needs any sort of special services or care or help reading because they're dyslexic or any sort of accommodations, you can't get that when you have inexperienced, teachers. Yesterday, the Supreme Court for once ruled unanimously that a deaf kid who had been getting A's and B's, all of a sudden, their school said he wasn't going to graduate. And they found out that none of the aides that had been assigned him knew sign language. So nobody,
Lord.
So he was not able to communicate with anybody for years, and they just kept promoting him. It was unanimous on the Supreme Court that that was not okay.
Yeah.
But it was happening and nobody knew it for a really long time because the classroom teacher didn't know how to do any special education. The aides didn't know special education or sign language, and it just kept getting, moved up to the next level. And this kid suffered.
Social promotion. That's what we call it in education. Social
Right.
promotion.
And if that child had been, if they had been given a voucher, they wouldn't have been able to get into any choice school either. People never talk about that. The fact that they don't have to provide special education. And in fact, you can go to these private and religious schools that accept taxpayer funded vouchers. And they'll say right on the site, we don't take any child who needs anything other than mainstream education.
That's
They can
exactly the same way. Same thing in Indiana. They take the vouchers and they want to go to one of the Catholic schools, private Catholic schools, because they think that there's a superior education there. But check the fine print. Don't bring along your dyslexia. Don't bring along any special needs because we won't be able to take care of it.
And then that school can keep the voucher when the kid goes back to the public school. So they defunded the public school. They can keep, at least in Missouri, they can keep the voucher and then the kid goes back.
That's exactly right. After a certain date, right? Yep.
Right.
So the Catholic school gets to keep the money and then mom and dad have to go put their kid back at the other school. Yeah. I mean, this is all intentional. I was working in the public schools when the vouchers hit Indiana under Mitch Daniels, and they sold it as a way to incentivize public schools to become better. That's how it was sold. And listen, I was one of those people who was like, well, that actually sounds reasonable, right? Like, if your school is not doing well, then you need to do better. And in the meantime, if I want to take my family and go someplace else. And of course, within 2-3 years, it just devolved into this, oh, now we all know what's going on, right? So for us, that was the big lie in public education in Indiana when it got started. It was terrible.
There's market solutions don't work in a couple places. One is healthcare, 2 is prisons, 3 is education. They don't work because we're not profit driven. You don't see teachers, obviously. They're working for peanuts most of the time, which that's not toxic positivity. If you you need to be paid more, but we're not profit motivated. I did a podcast with Joel Walsh. He ran for president, as a libertarian. He was a Tea Party guy, and he's a big pusher of charters and privatization. And he says, well, if you have a town with 2 hamburger joints and one of them serving better hamburgers, and I'm just like, kids aren't hamburgers, right?
Problem, right? I know. And that's what they want to do, though. They always want to put a sports analogy on education. They want to apply the business model to education. And then you realize, the kids aren't widgets. It doesn't work. It doesn't work.
It is the big corporations that are giving all this money so that employees are completely exploited.
Yeah.
And it's out in the open since Citizens United. And that's where all the policies come from, is the people who can pay the most.
And can we talk, because Citizens United sounds like a fantastic organization. Can we talk about the language of what they do?
Yes.
School choice, that means school choose. Right to work means you have the right to work for less. Up is down. It's all this coded language, and it's just awful. It's corporations, and you're right. They are always pushing for corporations.
Hey, Jess, when you were canvassing, when you were running for office and you're canvassing, what were you hearing at the door about these topics? So like you just said, the wording that they choose, it sounds nice, right to work. School choice sounds nice. What kind of level of education did you have to do at the door to let them know that what's happening in our state is exactly opposite? It's disintegrating.
Yeah.
Disintegrating.
Well, yeah, it's difficult just because I had the word Democrat behind my name. So that's a huge burden to carry in a lot of rural areas. So I would talk to people and they'd be like, oh gosh, you're nice. And I really like what you said, but I can't vote for you because I'm a Christian. I heard that a whole lot. And so people would say something about, well, Nancy Pelosi or Joe Biden. And I would always bring them back and say, they've got nothing to do with the highway that you can't drive on except for sending you money. It has nothing to do with your schools. And so it's a whole lot of education. And I didn't win this time. It was 1 in 4. I got 25% of the vote, which was kind of a gut punch because I tried so hard. I worked so
I
hard.
know. Oh.
That meritocracy doesn't work in politics.
I can totally relate, Jess. I can totally relate.
Yeah. The biggest thing for me is that people saw me and they were like, she doesn't have horns. I don't think she drinks the blood of infants. Like, it was seeing somebody who they have never seen before and didn't even know existed, knocking at their door and being a decent human. So there's a lot to be said for that.
Right. When we had Josh Lowry, who ran for state Senate, on, he was our second or third guest. He also didn't win, but he showed a lot of people that Democrats aren't like whack job devils.
Yeah.
And I think this leads us into the conversation about blue Missouri and blue Indiana and blue Ohio and blue Texas, this every state blue concept, where you can start to fund people so that more people can knock on the doors so that you get more people seeing what a real Democrat is. Can you tell us how it's working for you guys in Missouri and how you put it together and how things are going?
Yeah. So Blue Missouri actually supported me during my campaign. I didn't know about them until I got a check and I was like, wow, it had 4 digits on it, and you just don't see that out here. And the Missouri Democratic Party support me. I mean, they supported me with training and that sort of thing, but they couldn't fund me. They couldn't send me any money. And this is problematic. And you probably see it in your states too. What happened is after 20 years of a GOP supermajority, you start looking around in the rural parts of the state and saying that's unwinnable. You're not going to be able to change that for a long time. And so the funds dry up. People stop giving to these. And then you go even further back, right? Then it's absolutely impossible. In Missouri, 40% of the seats last year went uncontested. That means 2.5 million people had no Democrat to vote for in the state house. And so you hear people say, and I know you guys have probably heard it too, you get what you vote for. They don't have anyone to vote for. They didn't have a choice. And what happens is after a couple decades, people who may have been progressive or Democratic leaning become Republicans because they don't know there's any difference. There hasn't been a candidate for 2 decades. Why would they be a Democrat? There's no one to vote for. So at Blue Missouri, what they've done is they've decided to fund and support races that normally don't get funding and don't get support. And I can't blame Democrats, the party, for this, because we're in a sort of knee-jerk panic mode at this point. We don't have any statewide elected Democrats. We lost Nicole Galloway as auditor last year, and now there is none, not one. Yeah. So it's just, they look around the state and they'll pick 5 or 6 races and think maybe we should invest here. And, that's what they do. So Blue Missouri looks at the state as a whole. And we realize that you can't take anything back with 40% of the seats uncontested. We realize that rural Missouri, we have to do outreach and we have to have candidates who are willing to do the hard work, knocking on doors and calling voters. And then we support them. We've got your back if you will do that hard work, right? So we're just a community of people. The nice thing is, I'm not a good salesperson, and I hate getting funding emails that are like, we need $3,000 today, chip in, blah, blah, blah. And I'm always like, ew, like I don't like that. And
I don't think anyone does.
It feels like an ATM, like you're just using me today and then you're going to do it again next week. And we don't do that. We're a community. We have events. We talk to each other. I send out emails so that we're grassroots and we're taking our state back by funding the places that other people have refused or couldn't help.
Wow. So that sounds incredibly energizing and inspiring because, as we've already established for our listeners, Missouri and Indiana are exactly the same. I mean, they truly are. And I don't know what percentage of ours went uncontested, but we had a significant number of seats that went uncontested here in Indiana. I think we got 2 new people in the House. So you think about that investment, and you said 40% went uncontested. How do you build a bench? So how do you find those people who are willing to do the hard work, and how do you recruit them? And then knowing that they likely are to lose their first race. So I'm wondering what you think about in terms of like that kind of a strategy of building a bench.
Yeah, it's very difficult. I was a teacher, so I had to quit my job because in Missouri, you can't run for office and be a teacher at the same time. So I know, convenient, right?
Oh my gosh.
So I
Wow.
hear there's a lot of Republicans on Twitter that'll say, "Oh, you got fired," and I was like, "You should look up the rules that you passed, you jerk." But anyway, so that makes it difficult. It's also difficult. I talked to a small business owner yesterday, and she was quietly whispering to me, about politics. She couldn't do it. She would lose 75% of her business, right? So it's talking to people who are in the place that they can do it. They're retired or they're in a place where people aren't going to stop coming to their business, that sort of thing. So, that makes it difficult. And I hate to lose. I'm telling you.
And you guys are like, I worked with Heidi on her campaign. I was her communications director, and I think you're the same person. I think you're the same person.
That came out of my mouth. It's not that I've never lost. It's that I work really hard to make sure I'm successful, right? That's what it is. And I thought, if you work really hard and you get the right people around you, you're going to be successful.
Not in politics.
Not in politics. Not in these states.
I think that Heidi and Stephanie, I think that there's a better way. We talk about being a candidate and running and losing. You're really an organizer because you organized people that are together now, that have found each other and will not back down. And they know the message and they know each other and they know the process and they have infrastructure. So you're not a losing candidate. You organized how many people? And so if we could get folks to recognize that fact and not say, because they told me I was going to lose too, and that pissed me off. Because I was like, I don't do anything to lose. I never sign up to lose, but I did. But thinking of it now, my win number was around 8,000 people. But I was able to get 400 because, it's a small thing, but I was able to get 400 voters that didn't vote the last time to vote for me. I don't know if I flipped them or if they came out because, they felt like voting this time.
Right.
I think about those 400 folks all the time, right?
Right.
And if we don't have a candidate on the ballot this time, where do those 400 people go? They slink back. They go back.
Right.
And they may never come back out again. And so it's so important that it's going to be difficult. I got a fourth this time. What if I get a third? What if the next time I get a half? That's 5 cycles, right? But is it worth it? Yeah. It's worth it. And so that's what I tell people. You're an organizer. You can do this.
And that's the positiveness that comes out of losing a campaign, right? I find too, I've had a number of folks who are now running in the municipals who are reaching out. Can we meet? Can we talk strategy? Can we talk fundraising? Can we talk organizing? So I find now that I'm a confidant, right? Like another, and they all happen to be females, by the way. And, they're reaching out. We have coffee and we giggle and we, stress and we're angry about things. And so I find that I'm able to offer that kind of support, and it's real. It's not a party chair that maybe has never run or a state party chair that's never run, right? I know exactly where they are. Yeah. And now we have each other's cell phone numbers. And so it's building that out. Jess, I also wonder what your thoughts are on sharing of resources. So I ran for office. Now I have a database, right? And I had key organizers in my organization. To what degree should I be sharing those things with fellow Democrats? To what degree? Like, how do you think about that? Because my experience is that we operated in silos.
Yeah.
Right. And so I could have certainly benefited from those emails that those folks had collected, and they could have probably benefited from mine. And when I said, hey, shouldn't we do this reciprocity? It was kind of crickets. Yeah. It's like, well, I work really hard to get that. I'm like, I know, but if we swap, we'll be able to reach more people. I don't know. I guess I wonder, what do you think about that kind of reciprocity and building out a Democratic Party rather than focusing on one individual candidate?
I think that's a great idea. The only thing that I could do with Van was to clean it up because no one had used it. You guys can't even, you probably can. I spent all my time walking in barren fields when there's supposed to be a house there.
Even during my campaign, we started purchasing data outside of Van for that very reason, because we knew it was not reliable enough. I would also say that in the state of Indiana, we rely on an old Democratic playbook. And I came at loggerheads with some of the old guard about how we do things. And I was not comfortable with doing the old stuff. And yet we were really talked into doing some of this old stuff. And of course, now, hindsight, I've stood my ground on a number of things, but there were a few things that I didn't. And I went along because everybody was advising, this is the way we've always done it, and this is the way you do it. And I would have done things differently. Did you have that kind of an experience where you're talking? Yeah, you're grinning.
Yeah. So I called the Democrats and they were like, we've never heard of you. You should run for dog catcher. And I was like, well, okay. But I mean, I was thinking they didn't say that, but basically,
yes.
I was like, I'm going to run for state rep. And they're like, whatever. Why don't you, you're going to have to start Rolodexing yourself. And listen, I don't know rich people. Like, I don't know one. And so I was like, and my family they have $20 they can send my way, but it wasn't going to work like that. And so then they're like, well, you're going to end up spending all of your time calling donors. And I was like, no, I'm not. I absolutely will not, because I don't like to do that. And so what I did is I went on social media and I talked like I do. And I told people, this is what I need, because I need, flyers, I need door hangers, that sort of thing. And people sent me money. And let me tell you, I raised more than any candidate in the entire state in the middle of nowhere. I raised $275,000 for a state house race that nobody.
Oh, that's amazing.
It was
amazing.
It was social media, and it was me just being me. And I would tell people, be you, be genuine, be authentic, tell folks what you see, and then ask them to help. And I'm not calling rich people all day long and begging for money, because I hate it. And that's what keeps a lot of folks out. They're like, I don't want to call and beg for money because it's gross. We all know that it doesn't feel good to do it, and it's weird. And I've never asked for money in my entire life. Like, if I would have asked my parents, they've been like, literally get a job. That's how it is, And so that's what I did. And so I broke every single rule book. I broke every single one. And I am not sorry I did it. And I would do it again tomorrow. And I would encourage anybody else that's running, if it didn't work for you, break it and do your own thing.
Wow. Well, and that's just it, right? Break the old playbook. Do what is authentic to you. I think that's the best advice.
Can I tell you, too, that when they first told me I should run for dog catcher, within about 6 months, they called and asked me to run for auditor. And I was like, folks, but I'm an English teacher. Math, you want me? I don't even know what a spreadsheet is. Like, I cannot be the auditor of the state.
I don't think that matters so much.
Not these days. Not these days. Hey,
Ours pretty low.
I want to ask though. So we're Embark HVA, Hoosier Victory Alliance, is launching Blue Indiana, and I wonder what guidance, advice you have for us, and maybe pitfalls for us to sidestep.
I will say it's more difficult to build community when I'm not running for this position at the moment, but I'm gathering folks together and creating community. And I think the best way that you do that is just like I was talking about, just being completely authentic and giving people the resources they need, and saying the Indiana Democratic Party cannot fiscally take care of every single one of these races, and they're focused on these. The rest of Indiana is going, to hell in a handbasket because we're not funding these races. So we're going to come together. We're going to talk. We're going to visit. And it's about being real with people who are desperate for a message and desperate to see themselves in other people, especially rural folks. Like, it's scary sometimes. I put out my Biden signs when he was running, and they were stolen by the morning, and I have neighbors that have awful flags up that say, F you and F your feelings. It can be overwhelming to be in rural spaces. And if you can draw those people in, or you can draw those people that live in suburbs that are super Trumpy, and let them know you're not alone. And we have a mission. It's nice to talk and visit with people, but it's really nice to have a point of action that we're going to do this to help.
So Blue Indiana is going to be one of Hoosier Victory Alliance's, one of our projects, but we're also putting together a campaign academy so that we can help people who are running, have no idea what they're doing, and probably their best friend who also doesn't know what they're doing as their campaign manager. We want to be able to like tell them how to do all these things. How do you do a mailer? How do you reach out? How do you talk to people? And then we've got this podcast and I write a Substack. But I think the two things, you know, being able to fund people, bring them into community, and also like give them concrete things to do and how to do them, not just what to do, hopefully will help.
I'll tell you one thing that I struggled with even after I found my footing was getting the things that candidates don't know about. Like you were talking about flyers, lit, websites, who can create a commercial for me, who can record these things. If you guys could come together with like a packet, a bundle of somebody who could, you know, do these things for other people, that's super helpful, because that, even to the end, I was just struggling with trying to find union printed, you know. And so these are things that regular people have no idea how to do.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And we
want to provide
experienced that in Indiana as well. The party chair is excited that you're running, and then they're like, "Hey, good luck. We'll see you November, 4th." And you're like, "Wait, I don't know how to use it. I don't even know how to log in," and just like you said, I've never used Excel or, whatever the case may be. And that's why we're super excited about HVA being able to do this campaign academy, because then people have a place to go. They have energy and passion, but if there isn't some sort of support mechanism, they can't make those dreams become a reality, right? And we have to start building this bench. We absolutely have to be doing that. Talking about already in 2024, who's running? Yeah. Who's running? What are you going to need? What kind of support? Let's make sure you have it. And like you said, Jess, it's like, we lost. And yet I find myself now working in this space of building a bench. I'm having those conversations with people. So what are you thinking about? Do you know anybody who's thinking about it? Let's keep having the conversation and expanding it and not relying on the all go-tos, right? We have some of that where I am, because I'm a little more urban than it sounds like where you are and stuff. So we sometimes over-rely on the people who have run and have lost over and over again. It's like, let's bring new folks into the party. Let's get some new energy, get some new faces and I love that, being authentic and being yourself, throughout the old playbook. I absolutely think that would resonate here.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you think it's important that we talk about?
I think we talked about a lot of important things, but just recognizing that there are so many of us in the same space, in the same boat, and that it's happening, across the United States, in red states specifically. And for folks to remember that you can speak back. You don't have to accept everything. And like for me as a teacher, you kind of have to get along because people monitor what you say and that sort of thing. But you can still point to the people who are doing the things that are bad for your state and, not have to make commentary about their shoes or their hair, because the Missouri GOP has been hiding for a very long time by people trying to get along, just trying to compromise. And at some point you have to say, like, a couple of days ago, a friend of mine said, you're kind of partisan. And I was like, I can't not be. How could I not be partisan? Nothing around me has been impacted by Democrats. They have not done any of the things that need to be fixed. And so just letting folks realize that it's okay to point to the folks who are doing the things that you disagree with or that are harming your community and kids and people in your community. And then join together, band together with, people like you, people like me who are like, let's get together and do something about it. They have the money. The GOP has the money. We have people and we have the power of the people.
Wow. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jess.
Thank you,
it was
Jess.
Great to talk to you. And you're the same person, you and Heidi. And it sounds like Indiana and Missouri are right there together. And so joining together where we didn't necessarily know that there was...
No, we didn't know about this alignment, So this has been especially special, Jess, because you and I walked in each other's shoes And I know where you were a day after the election. And I love how we have both pivoted to find where we channel this energy and this passion, right? To make things right for all people in our state, not just a handful of folks.
And people, I hear it all the time. If you don't like it, leave it. Go to California, go to Florida. I will not. My farm is here. My kids are here. My grandkids are here. And it's my state as much as it is yours. And I'm not going anywhere. And so if people will just pick up that energy, I'm not going anywhere.
Right.
And we can. And how elitist is that, by the way? How could I go somewhere else, right? So we stay where we are and we fight until we have the state that represents our values.
Thanks for listening to our conversation with Jessica Piper. Please be in touch as we create our course for candidates and build Blue Indiana. We could use everyone's help, whether it's volunteering or just donating. We need you all. If you like what you heard today, smash that subscribe button wherever you get your podcasts, and please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. We thank you, and democracy thanks you.